Look at this woman. I don't think she belongs at this party. She looks homeless and only came for the food. Imagine walking into a room where everyone sees you as invisible, as less than. Then, imagine having the power to show them just how wrong they are in a way they will never, ever forget. This is the story of a night that started with 3 cruel words and ended with a revenge so sweet, so unexpected, that you won't believe how it all unfolds. Stay until the very end to see how one woman turned her pain into power. If you were captivated by this story of justice and unexpected twists, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales like this one. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from? Let me know your city name in the comments below. The air in the penthouse apartment was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of money. Glass walls offered a dizzying view of the city's glittering skyline, a kingdom laid out for the privileged few who floated through the spacious rooms, champagne flutes clutched in well-manicured hands. This was the annual fundraising gala for the city's most exclusive art museum, a place to see and be seen, a place where old fortunes nodded politely to new ones. Among the crowd, a young woman named Amara moved with a quiet grace that seemed almost out of place. She was not dressed in the loud, logo-splashed garments that screamed of new wealth, but in a simple, elegantly cut black dress that spoke of a different, more refined taste. She worked as a junior curator at the museum, and her role for the evening was to be invisible, to ensure the artworks on display were admired and the guests were happy to blend into the background like a piece of the furniture. She was arranging a tray of delicate canapes when the sound of laughter, too loud and too sharp, cut through the polite murmur of the party. A group of 3 had congregated near a stunning modernist sculpture, their backs to Amara. She recognized them instantly. Mark, with his family's real estate empire, Chloe, an influencer whose entire life was a carefully filtered brand, and Jason, a hedge fund manager known for his brutal deals and even more brutal opinions. They were the inner circle, the untouchables, the heirs to a world that seemed to operate on its own set of rules. Amara moved closer, her steps silent on the plush carpet, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She was there to offer them drinks, but she stopped just short of their circle, hidden partially by the large, twisting form of the metal sculpture. They hadn't noticed her. They were too absorbed in their own conversation. "I'm just saying," Mark slurred, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The whole diversity hire thing is getting ridiculous. They're sacrificing quality just to fill a quota. It's pathetic." Chloe giggled, sipping her champagne. "Oh, tell me about it. My brand manager suggested I collaborate with this one girl. Her content was so ghetto. I mean, the lighting was terrible. It's not my aesthetic at all. There's a certain standard, you know." Jason chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Standards. That's exactly it. They just don't have the same drive, the same polish. They're given everything, and what do they do with it? Nothing. It's a cultural thing, I think. A lack of ambition." Amara felt the air leave her lungs. The words weren't shouted. They were delivered with the casual, unthinking cruelty of people who had never been told no, who believed their every thought was not just opinion, but fact. They were talking in lazy, hateful stereotypes, reducing millions of people to a caricature for their own amusement. Her skin prickled, a cold heat spreading up her neck. She was that diversity hire in their eyes. She was the they spoke of with such disdain. She forced her feet to move, stepping into their line of sight with the tray. "More champagne?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside her. The 3 of them turned. Mark's eyes slid over her without a flicker of recognition, seeing only the uniform, the help. "Yeah, whatever," he muttered, taking a glass without a thank you. Chloe gave her a dismissive once-over, a slight wrinkle in her nose as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. "You might want to be more careful with that tray. You almost bumped into Jason." Her tone was icy, accusatory. Jason didn't even look at her. He just held out his empty glass, expecting her to take it, his conversation with his friends never pausing. "Like I said, no ambition, no sense of the bigger picture. Amara took the glass, her fingers trembling only slightly. In that moment, she wasn't just Amara, the junior curator. She was every black woman who had ever been overlooked, spoken over, or demeaned. The insult was a deep, personal wound, but it was also a spark. A cold, calculating clarity washed over her, dousing the initial fire of her anger and replacing it with something far more potent: a plan. The sweetest revenge is not a shout, but a whisper. It is not a slap, but a smile. It is not a hasty act of anger, but a patient, perfectly executed performance. She melted back into the background, becoming a ghost once more. But her eyes, now sharp and observant, tracked their every move. She noted the way Mark always took 2 drinks, the way Chloe constantly checked her reflection in any available surface, the way Jason held himself with an arrogance that was almost comical. She was no longer a victim of their words. She was a scientist, and they were her specimens. The party swirled on, a vortex of shallow conversations and empty laughter. Amara continued her work, her face a placid lake hiding a turbulent depth. Then, the moment presented itself. Chloe, preening before a large abstract painting, turned too quickly, and her elbow caught the edge of the tray Amara was holding. It was a faint touch, barely noticeable, but Amara allowed the physics to take over. The tray tipped. A cascade of champagne, golden and bubbling, arced through the air and landed directly on the front of Chloe's blindingly white, undoubtedly couture dress. The sound Chloe made was not human. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated horror. "You stupid, clumsy girl. Look what you've done. This is a vintage Dior. Do you have any idea what this cost? You could work for a year and not pay for it." All eyes turned to them. Mark and Jason rushed over, their faces masks of outrage and contempt. "What is wrong with you?" Mark snarled, stepping uncomfortably close to Amara. "Security!" Jason barked, looking around the room. "Get this incompetent woman out of here. Now." Amara stood there, head slightly bowed, shoulders slumped, the perfect picture of shame and fear. She murmured apologies, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, it was an accident. I'm so sorry." Inside, however, she was perfectly still. This was a first act. Their true colors were now on display for everyone to see, all over a spilled drink and a stained dress. Their rage was disproportionate, ugly. The other guests watched, some with awkward pity for Amara, most with silent judgment for the trio's viciousness. Just as a stern-looking man in a security uniform began to make his way through the crowd, a new wave of energy entered the room. A respectful hush fell, followed by an excited murmur. The host of the event, the elderly board chairman of the museum, was walking towards the commotion, and he was not alone. Beside him, with an air of calm authority that seemed to part the crowd, was a man everyone knew. Edward Sterling, the famously private and unimaginably wealthy CEO of a global tech conglomerate. He was the museum's largest benefactor, the reason this gala raised millions. He rarely made public appearances, and his presence here tonight was a coup. The chairman looked flustered. "What seems to be the problem here?" Chloe immediately launched into a tearful, exaggerated account. This server ruined my dress. She did it on purpose. She needs to be fired immediately and charged for the damage." Mark and Jason nodded vigorously, adding their own angry commentary. They were so focused on their performance, so sure of their victory, that they didn't notice the change in Edward Sterling's expression. He wasn't looking at the stain on the dress or the angry socialites. His eyes were fixed on Amara, who still had her head down. The chairman sighed, turning to Amara with a tired expression. "Young lady, I think it's best if you—" Edward Sterling raised a hand, a simple, gentle gesture that commanded absolute silence. The entire penthouse seemed to hold its breath. He took a step forward past the fuming trio and stopped in front of the seemingly humiliated server. Then he did something that made every single person in the room freeze in disbelief. The powerful, formidable billionaire, a man who shook hands with presidents, gently reached out and lifted Amara's chin with his finger until her eyes met his. And then he smiled, a warm, proud, almost relieved smile. He turned to the stunned chairman, his voice clear and calm, yet it echoed in the silent, tense room. "Fire her," Edward Sterling said, a note of amusement in his voice. "I'm afraid that's quite impossible. You see, this isn't a server. This is my boss." He paused, letting the impossible words hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, shattering blow. "Chairman, guests, allow me to introduce my daughter, Amara Sterling, the majority shareholder and true owner of Sterling Innovations. And I believe the anonymous donor whose $50 million donation tonight is set to save this museum from its current financial crisis." The silence that followed Edward Sterling's words was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the entire penthouse. The low hum of the city, far below, seemed to vanish. The clinking of glasses had ceased. For a long, agonizing moment, no one even seemed to breathe. Every single guest was frozen in place, their faces a gallery of stunned disbelief, their eyes wide and unblinking, locked onto the scene before them. The junior curator in the simple black dress was no longer there. In her place stood an entirely different person, her posture straightening, the feigned subservience melting away to reveal an innate, unshakable authority. The mask was off. Mark was the first to break. A choked, sputtering noise escaped his lips, a sound somewhere between a cough and a gasp. His face, once flushed with arrogant anger, was now draining of all color, turning a sickly, pale gray. His brain, fogged by expensive whiskey, was visibly struggling to process the information, the gears grinding to a halt. He took an unsteady step backward, as if physically pushed by the weight of the revelation. Chloe's reaction was slower, more visceral. Her mouth, which had been twisted in a snarl of outrage, now hung slightly open. Her eyes darted from Edward Sterling's calm, serious face to Amara's now composed one. She looked at the champagne stain on her dress, then back at Amara, and a dawning horror began to replace her fury. The vintage door was suddenly the least of her problems. Her hand, still clutching a napkin to the stain, began to tremble violently. Jason, the hedge fund manager, was perhaps the most interesting to watch. His was not a collapse of shock or a tremor of fear, but a swift, calculating reassessment. His eyes narrowed, and Amara could almost see the numbers scrolling behind them, the rapid recalculation of risk, asset, and liability. He was understanding the new playing field, and he understood it was a field where he held no power. The arrogance drained from his posture, replaced by a stiff, wary tension. Edward Sterling kept his gaze on the chairman, whose own face was a mask of profound confusion and dawning panic. "50 million, the chairman stammered, his voice a dry whisper. "The anonymous donation, it was her." "It was," Edward confirmed, his voice still calm, but carrying an undeniable edge now. "A gift contingent, of course, on the museum's continued commitment to its diversity and community outreach programs she herself designed." He finally turned his head, his eyes sweeping over Mark, Chloe, and Jason with a look of such cold disappointment that they seemed to shrink under its weight. It seems there is still much work to be done in changing certain outdated perspectives. All eyes swung back to Amara. She offered her father a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. Then she took a single, deliberate step forward. The movement was quiet, but in the profound silence, it felt like a thunderclap. She was no longer looking at her father or the chairman. Her focus was entirely on the three people who had, minutes before, believed they held her future in their hands. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words, when they came, were measured, clear, and cut through the room like a shard of ice. "An accident with a champagne glass," she began, her eyes settling on Chloe, who flinched. "A simple mistake. And your immediate response was to demand my job, to humiliate me, to suggest I could never afford the fabric of your dress." She paused, letting the memory of their venomous words hang in the air for everyone to recall. You judge my entire life's potential based on that one moment, based on the job I appear to be doing, based on the color of my skin. She turned to Mark. You spoke of quality and sacrifice. You spoke of a lack of drive and ambition. A faint, cold smile touched her lips. I founded my first company at 19. I secured my first million in venture capital by 21. The drive you questioned bought the painting behind you. The ambition you mocked funds the very institution that employs the diversity hires you seem to despise. Finally, her gaze landed on Jason. He met her eyes, his jaw clenched, a vein throbbing in his temple. You spoke of a bigger picture, Amara said softly. You were right. The picture is much bigger than this room, than this city. It's a picture you are no longer in. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The threat, delivered with such quiet certainty, was more terrifying than any shout. The spell of silence broke into a frantic, buzzing murmur. The crowd of socialites and philanthropists began to whisper amongst themselves, their shock turning into a hungry, scandalized excitement. Phones, previously used for photos of art and selfies, were now discreetly held lower, recording nothing, but ready to capture any further development. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly inverted and then detonated. The chairman, finally finding his voice, began to babble apologies, his hands fluttering nervously. Ms. Sterling, Amara, I had no idea. This is a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Please, we are so deeply grateful for your generosity. Amara held up a hand, and he fell silent instantly. Her authority was absolute. There was no misunderstanding, Charles, she said, using his first name with a familiarity that underscored her true position. Their words were very clear. Their intentions were very clear. She looked back at the trio. This gala is to support art and culture for everyone. It is not a private stage for their prejudice. Mark finally found his voice, a desperate, wheedling tone that was a pathetic imitation of his earlier bravado. Amara, please, we had too much to drink. We didn't mean, you know how these things are. It was just party talk. I do know how these things are, Amara interrupted, her voice dropping even lower, becoming almost conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. I've been listening to party talk like that my whole life. I've learned to understand exactly what it means. It was then that the main doors to the penthouse opened again. The crowd parted, and 4 people walked in. They were not guests. They were 2 men and 2 women, dressed in severe, dark business suits. They moved with a purposeful, efficient grace that marked them as something other than partygoers. They carried slim, professional briefcases. Amara didn't even look at them. She kept her eyes on Mark, Chloe, and Jason. You were concerned about the cost of a dress, Chloe, Amara said. You were worried about standards and quality, Mark. You were thinking about the bigger picture, Jason. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the newcomers. The lead woman, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped forward. She ignored everyone else and addressed the trio directly. Mark Evans, Chloe Reed, Jason Miller. My name is Anya Sharma. I am the head of legal for Sterling Innovations. She paused, her gaze cold and professional. We are here to discuss the immediate termination of all business relationships between our corporation and your respective families' ventures. We will also be reviewing the terms of your personal investments with our subsidiary funds. Please come with us. There's a conference room prepared downstairs where we can go over the details. The finality in her voice was absolute. This was not a discussion. It was an execution. The color completely drained from Jason's face. His family's fund was heavily leveraged with Sterling Capital. Mark looked like he might be sick. His father's entire real estate empire depended on loans from a Sterling-owned bank. Chloe, whose entire influencer brand was propped up by sponsorships from companies owned by the Sterling conglomerate, simply stared, her eyes blank with utter shock. The revenge was not a dramatic scene. It was not a slap or a shout. It was a quiet, efficient, and utterly devastating severing of the financial oxygen that kept their luxurious lives afloat. As the legal team guided the three shell-shocked figures away, their movements stiff and robotic with disbelief, the party watched them go. There were no jeers, only a hushed, awestruck silence. They were witnessing a social and financial annihilation in real time. Amara turned back to the crowd. The coldness in her eyes softened, replaced by a look of resolute calm. She picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing server's tray. She held it aloft. "A toast," she said, her voice once again clear and carrying, but now filled with a new warmth. "To art, to culture, and to a future where everyone has a seat at the table." As the guests, recovering from their shock, hurriedly raised their own glasses in a unified, eager motion, a single thought echoed in every mind. They had not just met an heiress. They had witnessed the rise of a queen, and they all knew, with chilling certainty, that they never wanted to be on her bad side. The party continued, but the air was forever changed. The laughter was more nervous, the conversations more careful. Everyone was watching Amara Sterling, who stood by her father's side, smiling politely, her deeply immersive and utterly unexpected revenge now only just beginning. The low, respectful murmur that had returned to the party was a completely different sound than the carefree buzz from before. It was the sound of people trying very hard to act normal, while their minds were racing, recalculating every interaction they had ever had with the quiet junior curator, every offhand comment they might have made within earshot of a server. Eyes followed Amara Sterling as she moved through the room, but no one dared to approach her directly. She was an island of calm in a sea of nervous energy, occasionally exchanging a quiet word with her father or giving a small, polite smile to the chairman, who hovered near her like a worried moth. Downstairs, in the sterile, soundproof silence of the building's executive conference room, a very different scene was unfolding. The air was cold, smelling of lemon-scented cleaner and expensive printer ink. The long, polished mahogany table felt like a barrier, a dividing line between two worlds. On one side sat Anya Sharma and her three associates from Sterling Innovation's legal department. Their expressions were neutral, their postures perfect, their pens resting on identical legal notepads. They were not angry. They were not emotional. They were simply a force of nature, a glacier of corporate policy moving with slow, inevitable purpose. On the other side of the table, Mark, Chloe, and Jason looked like survivors of shipwreck. They were still wearing their party clothes, a cruel joke under the bright, unforgiving fluorescent lights. Chloe's champagne stain was a dark, ugly blotch on the white fabric, a constant reminder of the moment their lives had tipped over the edge. Mark had his head in his hands, his fingers digging into his scalp. Jason sat rigidly, his arms crossed, staring at a spot on the wall behind the lawyers, as if he could burn a hole through it with the intensity of his gaze. Anya Sharma did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Each word was precise, clean, and fell into the silence like a stone dropping into a deep well. "Mr. Evans," she began, her eyes on Mark. "Sterling Bank is calling the full balance of all loans issued to Evans Properties. The covenants, as you know, include a morality clause. The public behavior of a principal, especially behavior that brings the bank's reputation into disrepute, constitutes a default." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a formal notice of default. The number at the bottom was astronomical. Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "You can't, my father. We need time to—" "You have 30 days to satisfy the debt in full," Anya continued, her tone never changing. She then turned to Chloe. "Ms. Reed, all brand ambassador contracts you hold with subsidiaries of Sterling Innovations are hereby terminated, effective immediately. This includes the exclusive deal with Lux Cosmetics and the upcoming sportswear campaign with Apex Athletics. The non-disparagement clause in your contract is now in effect. Any public statement regarding these terminations or the Sterling family will result in immediate legal action for damages." Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her entire identity, her income, her social media presence was built on those sponsorships. They were her lifeblood, and it had just been cut off. Finally, Anya's gaze settled on Jason. Mr. Miller. Miller Capital's entire position in the Sterling Vision Venture Fund is being liquidated. As the majority limited partner, we are exercising our right to dissolve the partnership. Your fund's performance has been lackluster. This decision is final. She placed another document in front of him. It was a financial death sentence. The fund was his family's crown jewel. Without Sterling's capital and backing, it would collapse, taking his reputation and his fortune with it. This is because of her. Jason finally spat out, his voice tight with a rage he could no longer contain. This is because of spilled drink? This is a personal vendetta. It's not business. It's emotional. You can't do this. Anya Sharma allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. It did not reach her eyes. Mr. Miller, everything we have discussed is a standard application of the contracts your own lawyers signed. The morality clauses, the performance reviews, the partnership dissolution rights. They are all there in black and white. Sterling Innovations simply chooses to enforce them. Tonight's events were not the cause. They were merely the catalyst that brought your situation to our attention. We are a business. We manage risk. And you, all three of you, had just been classified as an unacceptable risk. The finality in her voice was absolute. There are no loopholes, no arguments, no appeals. This was not a courtroom drama. This was the quiet, administrative end of everything they had. Back in the penthouse, the party was winding down. Guests were making their excuses, eager to leave and process the seismic event they had witnessed. Amara stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. Her father came to stand beside her. "They're finished," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Anya is handling it. It's clean. By the time the business news picks it up next week, it will all be presented as straightforward financial decisions." Amara nodded slowly. "Good. Was it?" Edward asked, his voice gentle but probing. "Was it what you wanted?" She turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the city's glow. There was no triumph in her eyes, no glee. There was only a deep, weary satisfaction. "I didn't want to ruin them, Dad. I just wanted them to see. I wanted them to understand that the person they look down on, the person they dismiss without a thought, might be the one holding all the cards. I wanted the world they love so much to see them for what they are. And I wanted them to lose that world because of it." She looked back at the sparkling city, a kingdom she largely owned. "They didn't just insult me tonight. They revealed the rotten foundation their perfect lives are built on. I didn't break the foundation. I just asked the architect to stop supporting it." A soft chime came from the elevator. The doors slid open, and Anya Sharma and her team emerged. The party, what was left of it, watched them walk across the room. They did not go to Edward Sterling. They went directly to Amara. Anya gave a slight, respectful nod. "It's done, Miss Sterling." "Thank you, Anya," Amara said. "The documents?" "Signed and executed. The process is underway." The last remaining guests watched this exchange, this confirmation of the new order. The power did not flow from Edward to Amara. It was, and always had been, hers. He was merely her proud and loyal steward. As the last of the guests filed out, filled with a new and fearful respect, Amara was finally alone with her father. The vast penthouse was quiet, the only evidence of the party being the empty glasses and the lingering scent of perfume. "What will you do now?" Edward asked. Amara walked over to the modernist sculpture near where the three had stood hours before. She ran a finger along its cool, metal surface. "The same thing I've always done," she said. "My work. The museum will get its money. The outreach programs will expand. And I will keep watching. The world is full of Marks, Chloes, and Jasons. They think their money and their social circles make them invincible. They think their words don't have consequences." She turned to face her father, a new resolve in her eyes. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life being the consequence." The city below never truly slept, but in the deep hours after midnight, its pulse slowed to a steady, quiet hum. The penthouse was empty now, a cavern of polished floors and dark glass. the ghost of the party lingering in the faint smell of flowers and the occasional abandoned glass. Amara stood alone at the window, the sprawling grid of lights reflecting in her calm eyes. The performance was over. The masks were put away. The quiet, unseen architect could finally rest. In the silence, the events of the night replayed not with the roar of the crowd, but with the sharp, clear focus of a chess game finally concluded. Across the city, the consequences of her moves were beginning to land, not with a dramatic crash, but with the soft, final thud of a tombstone being set in place. Mark Evans stood in the echoing emptiness of his own luxury apartment, a place bought with debt and confidence. His phone, which had been buzzing incessantly for the last hour, now lay silent and dark on the marble kitchen counter. He had answered the first call from his father. The screaming on the other end had been so loud, so raw with panic and fury, that Mark had held the phone away from his ear. The words had been broken, chaotic, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. The loans were being called. All of them. The banks his family had bullied for years were now turning into stone-faced executioners. The projects, the properties, the entire carefully constructed empire of Evans Properties was built on sand, and the tide was coming in faster than anyone could run. He looked around at the expensive art, the designer furniture, all of it now just inventory for a fire sale. He was not just broke. He was drowning in a debt he could never repay. The arrogant man who spoke of quality and standards was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out boy facing a future of nothing but lawsuits and shame. In her pristine, all-white apartment, Chloe Reed was also staring at her phone, but her screen was a different kind of disaster. It was a social media graveyard. One by one, like lights going out across a city, her sponsorships had vanished. The official logos from Lux Cosmetics and Apex Athletics disappeared from her profile. Their posts tagging her were deleted. Then came the direct messages from their PR teams, cold and formal, citing clause violations and immediate termination. Her follower count, which she checked with a sickening addiction, was beginning to plummet. The first news articles were popping up on gossip sites, their headlines coy but deadly. Influencers fall from grace after gala drama. Sponsors drop Chloe Reed following incident at museum fundraiser. The comments were already filling with speculation and venom. Her perfect, filtered world was cracking open, and the real world was pouring in, ugly and cruel. She was not just losing income. She was becoming irrelevant, a cautionary tale whispered about at parties she would never be invited to again. Jason Miller sat in the dark of his office, the skyline view now a mockery. The screens on his wall, usually a chaotic dance of green and red numbers, were all dark. His entire career, his reputation as a ruthless winner, was built on his association with the Sterling Vision Fund. That association was now over. The email from Sterling's legal team was brief, a masterclass in destruction in just 3 paragraphs. The fund was being dissolved. His investors, the moment they found out, would not be disappointed. They would be homicidal. They had trusted him with hundreds of millions, and he had just lost his biggest, most crucial partner because he couldn't keep his mouth shut at a party. He could already see the headlines in the financial papers, the SEC investigations, the lawsuits that would tie up the remains of his fortune and his freedom for years. He had played the big-picture game his whole life, and he had finally met a player whose picture was so vast, he was just an insignificant speck in the corner, now being wiped away. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. In the penthouse, Amara finally turned from the window. She picked up a single, discarded champagne flute from a side table and carried it to the kitchen. The silence was peaceful now, not empty. There was no guilt in her heart, only a quiet sense of closure. This was not about being cruel. It was about balance. It was about demonstrating that the universe sometimes delivers justice in a language the unjust can finally understand. The loss of power, the loss of status, the loss of comfort. A week later, the business news sections confirmed what the society blogs had already whispered. Evans Properties filed for bankruptcy. Miller Capital was under investigation for questionable accounting practices suddenly brought to light. And Chloe Reed's name had disappeared from the public eye entirely, her social media accounts deleted, her brand erased as if it had never existed. Amara did not celebrate their downfall. She simply continued her work. She was in her new office at the museum, a spacious room with a view of the city gardens, when the chairman brought her the final plans for the new community outreach wing. It was to be named, at her insistence, the Unity Wing. He was nervous around her now, his respect tinged with a deep, healthy fear. "The architects are ready for your final approval, Ms. Sterling," he said, placing the blueprints on her desk. Amara looked at the plans, at the classrooms and galleries designed to bring art to everyone, especially those who had always been told it was not for them. She thought of the 3 people who had tried to make her feel that way. They were a lesson, not a victory. "It looks perfect," she said, smiling at the chairman. Her smile was genuine, warm. It held no trace of the coldness from that night. That was reserved for those who earned it. She stood up and walked to her own window. Down in the gardens, a group of schoolchildren were on a tour, their faces bright with excitement. She watched them for a moment, a new generation who would walk through the doors of her museum and see a place for themselves. The revenge was complete. It had been swift, precise, and utterly devastating. But for Amara Sterling, it was never really about the past. It was about building a future where a woman in a simple black dress would never be made to feel small again. And as she turned back to her desk, ready to build that future, one project at a time, the city outside gleamed, not with the cold light of money, but with the warm promise of a new day.